But that's not possible if there's no longer a free press, but rather a colluding press. Hi, and thank you so much for joining me. Well, the Royal Rota. In my last live, I mentioned that most commentators won't look at it impartially or indeed tell the truth about it because Harry and Meghan spoke out against it. We don't like them, so we'll not give any power to anything they say. So on that basis, it was rather tempting to leave all this alone. However, I'm sure that when it comes to the Royal Rota, Prince William doesn't like it or trust it any more than Harry does. And with the considerable pressure placed on him by the Royal Rota outlets over the last 10 days, I can really understand why. We've been subjected to a relentless campaign of proverbial olive branches and Prince William being framed as the impediment to it all. Valentine Lowe outdid himself with poetic imagery in the Sunday Times, getting us all to visualise Harry and Meghan on the balcony for Trooping the Colour 2027. It's a pity he couldn't provide the same level of vivid detail about what he witnessed at Birkenhead as he covered that visit for the Royal Rota. I remember his headline, something about Meghan let slip, about Archie's birth date, apparently. But this video isn't really about the never-ending saga that is Harry and Meghan. It isn't about negative press or positive press because that's impossible to prove. It's about something far more important, something that strikes at the heart of what the Fourth Estate is supposed to stand for, holding those in power to account. But that's not possible if there's no longer a free press, but rather a colluding press. The Royal Rota is a press pool system that provides select UK media outlets exclusive access. Its intended function is to cover the royal family's official engagements, and on the surface, it appears to be a purely practical arrangement. It contains journalists from major UK publications, such as the Daily Express, the Daily Mail, the Daily Mirror, the Evening Standard, the Telegraph, the Times, and the Sun. Now, you'll note that that's very tabloid heavy, the only exceptions being the Telegraph and the Times. So it's a very select group that's been given privileged access to the royal family. Now, if you take away anything from this video, I want you to take away this. This is the main point, and this is why I'm making this video. The Royal Rota has the infrastructure in place to collectively construct a narrative. I want to repeat that for emphasis. The Royal Rota has the infrastructure in place already to collectively construct a narrative. Now, what might that look like? It means that one reports a royal story and the rest report it verbatim. And that isn't confined to just official engagements, is it? We see it all the time. And the sinister aspect of this is the potential for collusion. They could all agree to present a certain angle, or they could all agree not to report on something they all know. They could sit on it to stay in favour with the palace or have something over the palace. As a collective entity, they could threaten to break a damaging story. The power of multiple outlets all sharing a hit piece at the same time. That would bring any comms team into line, wouldn't it? Critics assert it's an outdated system. It was established over 40 years ago, predating the digital and social media eras. But in reality, this is just the latest formal iteration of a very cosy little setup that's always existed, even going back to Queen Victoria's time. So let's look at this serious allegation that access is traded for favourable coverage or towing the line, which predictably has been vigorously denied by many of the senior journalists in the Royal Rota. Now, one of these vigorously denying is Rebecca English. Much loved among many royal fans, her profile has risen to the extent that fans actually seek her out for chats and selfies on official engagements. And I can understand why. She comes across as a very warm woman who says all the right things, all the things royal fans want to hear. Well, most of the time. Although I do remember all the Mail's Palace Confidential team took advantage of Catherine's Mother's Day photo pile-on. The Wales independence continues to grate at the Royal Rota, it seems. However, Rebecca English also wears another hat. She's reportedly assigned captain of the Royal Rota, solely in charge of managing the rotation of members to cover each royal. So it's to be expected that there are accusations of her gatekeeping access to the royal family and keeping coverage of the best gigs for herself. However, there's a more serious point in all this. It is now a matter of recent public record that Rebecca English is one of the many senior journalists alleged to have played a role in transactions with firms that were hired by the Mail. Now, these firms are alleged to have carried out services such as phone hacking, listening to voicemails, burglary, and landline tapping. Now, I must emphasise all these allegations are denied by associated newspapers, and they are going to have their day in court to have the opportunity to clear all their journalists' names, including Rebecca English. So that's the background. I've laid the foundation, but my question is this. As the Mail essentially runs the Royal Rota, why aren't they standing aside until this court case is heard? And also, you've got to ask, why wasn't the Royal Rota system abolished after the Levinson inquiry? There were charges proved against multiple press outlets. Compensation was paid. People were jailed. And yet the Royal Rota system continued unabated, obviously too mutually beneficial to give it up. Now, in the recent Daily Beast expose, this favoured access was demonstrated. It was proven in real time when the Palace's Tobin Andre used WhatsApp communication with Royal Rota members. He actively acted to suppress further reporting of a story that the Telegraph had already published about King Charles III's funeral plans. Now, obviously, the only interest in the story was generated by the fact that Harry and Meghan had planned involvement, and there was a dismayed, visceral reaction. It fueled speculation that there was literally nothing that the dastardly duo could do to lose their very profitable royal association. Now, bear in mind, Tobin wasn't asking for Royal Rota members to print a correction, or update the story, or to provide more context from the Palace's point of view. He was telling them not to run the story, or they would be punished by being denied formal briefings at some future point. So in other words, play ball or you're out. There's no other way to interpret it. Now, there was a sentimental reaction by some that it was unseemly to discuss the funeral plans of a monarch currently receiving treatment for cancer, and I get that and I sympathise with that. But it doesn't really scan. The funeral plans about every senior member of the royal family have been leaked, shared and discussed at some point, many, years out from their actual funerals. I remember it leaking about Prince Philip's Land Rover playing a major part in his funeral years before his death, but the difference is that had a very favourable public reaction. Now, all of this should raise concerns about censorship, or at the very least, undue influence. They can't deny that there is a system in place where certain media outlets are granted exclusive access because that is the system in place. And the disturbing outcome of this is it discourages competition, it discourages accountability, and it lays the groundwork for possible collusion. So I hope I've illustrated that there's obviously a need for reform. There's no way, in my opinion, that the Royal Rota fits in with any contemporary journalistic standards, or more importantly, meets the public expectation. Now, I'm going to finish off this video by illustrating a period where this media horse trading really peaked, courtesy of Tom Bower in The Rebel Prince. Now, some of this you're probably going to find a little shocking and really confronting, so buckle up. At the height of the royal family's most fraught era, Tony Blair advised Queen Elizabeth II that she had basically two choices: retreat into isolation to avoid all the negative press, or seek to become more like a normal family. Well, we all know they didn't retreat into isolation. However, that choice made it imperative that they control the narrative going forward. Now, Bower gives us a great example of that palace machine when Mark Bolan was appointed as Assistant Private Secretary to the then Prince Charles. From that point, the heir to the throne's fortunes, and favourable press coverage started leaning very firmly in the then Prince Charles's favour. I guess Boleyn didn't contact them by WhatsApp though. Tom Bower writes in The Rebel Prince, which later became The Rebel King, that for Charles to entrust his fate to someone like Boleyn was, and I quote, the last throw of the dice. The hope was that Boleyn possessed the necessary media contacts to turn the public's perception of the then Prince of Wales around. Obviously, he did, and boy, did it need turning. After Boleyn took up his new position, Bower states that an insidious pattern was noticed fairly quickly, that any courtier, usually the Queen's courtiers, that opposed Charles in any way was subsequently destroyed by the media with poison planted against them by his representative, Mark Boland. Now, Bower gives us a real example of this in great detail, and it was Robert Fallows. The backgrounding against Robert Fallows was planted in the Mail on Sunday on the 2nd of November 1997. Now, the article accused Robert Fallows of being prejudiced against Charles for wanting to live with the love of his life, Camilla. And I guess the fact that he was married to the then late Diana's sister, it may have led to some unconscious bias on his part. The Sunday Mail piece dismissed him as a joke, who was loathed in the palace. Now, Bower points out that that just isn't true. And he was blamed for the public perception at the time for uncaring, dysfunctional senior royals. Now, it must be said, at the time, the main dysfunctional senior royal was Charles, as Diana had already tragically died, and Fergie was running around the world creating fresh humiliations for the palace, but she was officially an ex-royal at this stage. It could be argued, though, that Charles's toxic public image wasn't the work of Fallows, but rather the result of his own behaviour, which of course included his disastrous relationship with the late Princess of Wales. Now, I have explored that relationship fairly many times from both sides, and I've found that my audience's view is really influenced by which team they're on, Team Charles or Team Diana, and I can't really penetrate through that. But regardless of that, it is a fact that Diana's global fame really intensified worldwide media scrutiny. Now, that's a lot harder for the palace to control, worldwide media scrutiny, because there is no worldwide Royal Rota. I also won't deny that Diana was very savvy exploiting all of this. She was an expert at controlling her own public image via the media. And I also won't deny that Charles was great at it too. I think sometimes out of necessity. But Diana knew that many were out to destroy her reputation, so she had to keep her hand on the wheel. Probably like most things, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. But let's get back to Fallows. He was blamed. The word around Downing Street was, and I quote, Robert's been stuffed by Boland. And the desired result for the then Prince Charles was achieved. After 7 years of loyal service, the Queen very reluctantly agreed to accept Fallows' resignation. Now brace yourself again, because Bower tells us that the prevailing view within the palace, this isn't me talking, this is the prevailing view within the palace at the time, was that in order to save himself, the then Prince Charles had infected the royal palaces with jealousy, vulgar extravagance, and deceit, end quote. Really harsh words. And as you can probably tell, Bower does not pull any punches in this book. It's interesting to me that when Bower's questioned about these at times really horrifying claims in this book, Bower responds rather vaguely, with soothing responses such as he believes the now King Charles has grown into his role, and no one ever digs deep or challenges him on it. Now, Boleyn was formally hired as soon as Charles's divorce from Diana was finalised, and Bower informs us that his brief was clear, another direct quote, to improve the public's reaction to Camilla and destroy Diana. However, after Diana's tragic death, that was all abandoned, and Boleyn's firm focus swung back to the enhancement of the then Prince Charles's image. Now, at that point, there was real fears all around the palace that he would never ascend to the throne. The polls at the time, which I've checked out, showed real danger to the monarchy. Prince Charles' favourability rating sat at a miserable 4%. Now, it's relevant to refer to this history as an example of the fact that the court of the then Prince Charles, and possibly the court of the now King Charles, has always been capable of defending themselves, of planting a message via the media to achieve their desired outcomes. The evidence is there. So I don't think that's really an excuse anymore for not speaking out very firmly against Harry and Meghan. Now, I don't overly judge the palace for any of this. Clearly, controlling the narrative protects the monarchy. But I'm not going to cover it up either, just because it's an inconvenient truth. Whether any of this disturbs you or not will be swayed by your own views on the Fourth Estate, free press, democracy, and I hope you'll share them without fear or favour in the comments below. I'll share your comments in a future live. Now, I'll be sharing more insights from Bauer's controversial book in the weeks ahead, but I'm going to leave you with a little teaser. Charles wanted a final reckoning with Diana. In the War of Royal Books, he contemplated cooperating with Penny Jr. Junior's book would focus on presenting Camilla in a very favourable light, but would also disparage Diana and portray Charles as the victim of a sick wife. To avoid the recriminations that hounded him after the Dimbleby book, Charles decided that any cooperation with Junior should be via Boland, which really smacks of the cooperation between Harry and Meghan and Omid Scobie for Finding Freedom. So I thought it would be really interesting to examine Penny Jr.'s book too. Thanks so much for joining me. I can't wait to hear what you think about all this, and I'll see you again really soon. Bye.